So I recorded just when you coughed.
Really? Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the opening to our podcast today. Welcome to Roll of a Tangent episode. Who knows? Whatever. Um,
8.
and 8. There you go. I'm so
9.
sorry, everybody.
9.
9.
Yeah, the last
Is it
one.
8 or 9? Actually.
The god in the bowl was 8. Yeah.
All right. So this is 9.
Hmm.
Hi, 9. I knew this. This was just a joke. This is just a
Right.
joke for you guys. Don't worry about it.
Uh-huh.
Um, so tonight we're looking at a horror short story. I mean, Call of Cthulhu was probably our first short story that had like horror, but this one is just as inventive in some areas and very inspiring. It's called The Lost Hearts by M.R. James. Um,
Just lost
and
heart without the.
Well, I'm sorry. All right, I'm just trying to fit in into. We had this conversation like three podcasts ago. Just trying to fit in into your limited language by using the everywhere.
Oh, shots fired.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm mean at the beginning always. Yeah, Lost Hearts. You're right. My apologies. Thank you for correcting me, Rob. Do you want me to do the summary, guys, or does someone else want to do it?
Actually, why not let Rob? Can you help us?
I can introduce it if you like.
Yeah.
Right, Lost Hearts by M.R. James. That's to say Montague Rhodes James. First appeared in the Pall Mall magazine, December 1895, and it's in my opinion, absolutely faultless or almost faultless horror story. It's only 15 pages long. I realized to my surprise as I reread it. 15 pages of really spellbinding narrative. The basic theme is, as one realizes right at the end, the basic theme is the unimaginably horrific crime committed by a man who believes he can acquire superpowers, perhaps including immortality, by tearing the heart out of the living body of 3 children and mixing the hearts with wine and drinking them. Now, this sounds rather distasteful, to say the least, but I can assure the reader that he is led like in an ominously gentle nightmare to the theme. And I'll just quote from the introduction to my edition of M.R. James's short stories. It says, James is a master of place, topography, scholarly detail, and seemingly authentic documentation. That's a strong point of H.P. Lovecraft as well, of course. And he invites the reader to suspend disbelief by evoking the sinister aura which may surround an otherwise ordinary, though disconcerting, location. You get little nudges of disconcertingness, if there is such a word, throughout the story. And let me just give you an example. The housekeeper at Aswarby Hall, Mrs. Bunch, cheerfully chats with young Stephen Elliott, who is, unbeknownst to himself, destined to be the 3rd victim of his host, about the other 2 children who were invited to live there some years back, and both of whom inexplicably disappeared. And this housekeeper cheerfully wonders why on earth they disappeared. They were well treated and all that. And the reader starts to say, this looks a bit suspicious. Anyway, the 3rd murder does not happen, and the reason it does not happen is, one can summarize it in terms of supernatural vengeance. Mr. Abner, the murderer and the would-be murderer of Stephen, comes to a frightful end at the hands of his earlier victims. I want to say that it's not really how it sounds when I'm telling it. The whole story is not told in a "oh dear, isn't this awful" kind of tone. It's told in a not quite cheerful, but very gentle sort of way. And you hear about these frightful hints, or these disconcerting hints in the same kind of cheerful style. Before I hand over to my colleagues, I just want to say, quote, one more thing, which is, if I can just quickly go to page 30 of my edition, just before Stephen's invited to discuss some things with his host, which will be important for his future. That's another disconcertment. And he sees some shapes outside. Young Stephen sees some shapes outside, including a girl whose hands are clasped over her heart, and the boy, a thin shape with black hair and ragged clothing, raised his arms in the air with an appearance of menace and of unappeasable hunger and longing. So there you are. And just a bit earlier, there's a sort of procession through the woods of what must be spirits, and one is left to speculate as whether they are a gigantic procession of spirits through the ages, victims through the ages of similar atrocities. It's not really made clear. We just have to guess, really. It's a fantastic story. I don't suppose I've done it justice.
Oh, come on. Don't say it that way. I think you described it in a perfect manner that you could have in the 5 minutes that you had. I mean, put it this way: it's a story that doesn't feel its age, like, really. It's a pretty old story, but the level of detail and the twists are pretty fascinating. Even though, as an adult reader, you probably know that something wrong is about to happen as soon as you start reading it. To a child mind, which I think is really what's going on in the story. I mean, you said that it's written in such a calmly manner, and I think that's because, at least the way I felt it, it's written like as if a child is feeling all these emotions. And when you're a child, you're a lot more trustworthy. You have a lot of more trust in the adults. You kind of rely on them. And I think the horror for me came actually from the fact that there is these terrible people who, if they are not completely in on it, are still sort of like kind of understand that something weird is going on here, and they're totally fine with just letting it continue. Like like there's a really poignant moment when Stephen asks Miss Bunch, the housekeeper, if Mr. Abney is a good man and if he will go to heaven. And I felt that moment as like, that's such a childlike thing to ask, and it's so pure. And I could, like, my stomach turned upon reading it the second time, because I realized that this woman is just like completely doesn't have any any responsibility over what's going on in the house. Because, I mean, later the butler speaks with her regarding voices coming out from the wine cellar, obviously where one of the bodies is, and the disused toilet. I think that's where another body is located, right? But anyways, the whole the horror to me is the adults who are completely sort of like not trying to stop this man at all.
The sense
And
the sense that I get is that the other adults in the story are just oblivious.
that's not the feeling I got. I
Really?
felt that
You felt
I
like they were
felt
complicit.
well, because there's the particular moment I'm thinking about, which made me think that they are complicit, is when the butler comes in and he's like, I'm sick and tired of hearing these weird noises in the wine cellar. No worries at all. Like it's something is going on there, and I don't like it. And Miss Bunches immediately just goes, "Oh, it's just rats." And then he's like, "Rats don't talk." Right, and as soon as Steven starts being like, trying to get answers from them, yeah, again with this child wonder, they completely move off the discussion. Now, this could be perceived as just two adults trying to not scare a child, but to me, the sinister undertone was that these people know who they're serving. They know this terrible person that that is above them, that has probably done some terrible things. One child that you adopt goes missing, that's okay. Two children. Why, if they are so oblivious that they are not asking questions, then I mean, I don't believe it. I don't buy it. And I think the story becomes stronger for me if they are complicit. I think it becomes weaker if they are oblivious. Because, I mean, isn't that what evil basically is all about? Is when other people do nothing, even though they see it happening. Because Steven can't do anything. He's a child. He has no agency in this world of adults. He is at their mercy. And unless these ghosts would have intervened, he would suffer the same fate as the other two children. And his heart would have been drunk with wine, and maybe this crazy alchemist, his old uncle, Mr. Abney, I think. Maybe he would have become immortal, or maybe he would just had indigestion for like 2 weeks. Who knows? I mean, but the point is that for me the horror is the fact that, like, I am like a responsible adult, and I get for 15 pages to watch as Steven might die in front of me, and I can't do anything about it. That's what I mean. Maybe it's because I what is it called? I have a great distraught over, like, whenever children are in harm's way. Maybe that's why it affected me that way. But that's really what the horror was. Not even the reveal of this horrible stuff that he was gonna do. Because I guess I assumed that Mr. Abney was a bad man, like almost from the start. But the idea to me that these people would just let it all happen, I think that's the most sinister part of it. And maybe it's the undertones I found for myself, but regardless, that means that the work that we read is that compelling that it can make these undertones appear, even maybe if the author did not imply them, right? Speaks of how well it's written.
That's a very eloquent. I mean it totally honestly, like a very eloquent summation of your feelings upon reading the story. I feel, which makes me feel like I'm a terrible reader because and that foresight makes a person a cold bastard. The reason I say that is because, like, when I was reading the story, I felt very much the same as when I was reading the Red-Headed League of Gentlemen, the Sherlock Holmes story that we covered a few weeks ago. And the reason is because the setup was like, I don't know if it's because I am a modern reader, as I mentioned the other time, and that this would have been much more impactful 200 years ago. And that is, I could see the end coming within like the first I think before 50% of the book, the short story was over, I could see what's going to happen at the end. The hints are very obvious to me, and I could tell that the story was going to end with our cannibalistic antagonist, sorcerer, if you want to call him that, was going to meet his end in probably by the hands of his two previous victims. And so knowing what's going to happen, I was like, okay. So there wasn't that much of a mystery, and I knew he was going to get his comeuppance, and so I felt none of the gut-wrenching stuff that Nikki felt upon reading the story. And I think yeah, if you know somebody's gonna get his comeuppance, I guess a person could be a little bit more calm about well, actually, no, I take that back. Even if I knew what Hitler was going to come to, I don't know if a person could remain calm in 1939, between the time of 1939.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but look at it from this perspective. I don't think your takeaway is wrong in any way. I mean, you're bringing up good points, right? You're bringing up the points that for a modern reader, this could be seen as a pretty soft twist for the story, right? But I think the usual defense that people jump to, especially critics, I think is inherently wrong. Even though it is a story that was written a long time ago, it's a simple twist, right? But I don't think that the right. So here's the way I see what it means to like read something and then review it. When you look over it, you have to have a clear mind, and you can make comparison afterwards. You can create sort of like connections of other books and stuff that you've read, and obviously that will happen. But when you're reading the story, I think it is preferable if you try and clear your mind and try not to think about what's going on ahead. Just reading things as they come. Be more like Stephen, right? Like don't expect anything in your mind, and maybe then the the main focus of the story will become clear to you, or like the intent of the author. But again, like it's not that your criticisms are unfound. The story compared to something that you would see in the modern day doesn't have enough of a quote unquote oomph that is required to wow the current audience. But I project to you that something that is simple but done well is much better than very complex but doesn't make any sense. And this story, it has a good like beginning, middle, and an end, right? And it really follows it through, and it doesn't try to distract you from other stuff. That's one of the reasons I love short stories. It's the purest form of storytelling, because just like at a campfire, you don't have that much time, right? And that's where stories come from people talking around such places. So you have to really concise everything together, and I think this story does it really well.
Well, I absolutely agree that the story is well written. I think the strongest point for me is the atmosphere. And you're very astute, Nikki, when you are describing the story as like even sort of like a children's story, because when I was reading it, I did get the sense of like I was reading Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer. There was that sort of, if I didn't know at the start that this was going to be a horror story, reading it, I could easily see it as one of those adventure stories with a little bit of that sort of like a scare that children at that age would give each other, and they would just have an adventure and then come out at the end, and all of the horror elements would have not been present in the beginning if I hadn't known that it was going to be a horror story. Yeah.
The first reading of any good story is, with any kind of mystery in it, is always going to be different from subsequent readings. But subsequent readings, you look at the mystery knowing what's going to happen, but you appreciate it in a different way. You appreciate how it's done rather than trying to find out what's going to be done. And that's a different sort of appreciation. I must admit, this time when I read it, I'd forgotten how broad the hint was when Mr. Abner greets Stephen the first time. He says, "How are you, my boy? How are you? How old are you?" Says he, "That is to say, you're not too much tired, I hope, by your journey to eat your supper." And then there's good lad. And how old are you, my boy? He keeps returning to this odd point, and of course, it's something to do with the nefarious ritual he intends to perform. It has to be done to a person of a certain age. There are lots of things like that. You can reread it and find out more about how the effect is produced. There's no end to. In a way, it's more mystery, but it's mystery of a different sort. It's mystery of how on earth an author can produce these effects.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like that conversation Rob just described in the book, how old are you? How old are you? That was just like a huge red. It was like a quest marker, you know, ding, ding, ding. Impossible to miss if you're a desensitized modern reader like I am.
Well, not only that, but I mean, if you're also a sensitive chap like I am, it's equally important.
That's true. It was creepy how Mr. Abney, is that his name?
Mr. Abner, yeah.
Abner.
Oh, by the way, his place, Aswarby Hall, actually did exist.
Oh.
It was apparently it was pulled down in the year 1951, but before then, it did exist.
Yeah, because they found all the children. They're like, we don't want this.
No,
I'm joking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Is there like a? I must have a look on the internet if there's any sort of like surviving paintings or pictures of it. I'd love to see it. That's fascinating.
It's not actually like it was described in the book, but the
Isn't it?
name and the actual geographical location are authentic.
Well, I mean, it would be pretty hard in 1904 to check facts of this story as someone reading it in, like, let's say, Russia. So, as far as the author was concerned, probably no one would ever ask. So it makes sense. It is only recently where, like, the idea of it being authentically correct when you're describing something in the real world, like, becomes such a big thing. You see it a lot in the media, where it's like, this movie really went into those places and they really were there, and it's like really important, right? But I mean, isn't the first desire is to prolong and vivify your imagination when you read something, right?
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised actually that M.R. James took the risk of choosing a name of a real house that was standing in his time. I would have thought it, might risk a libel action. from
Oh,
whoever was living there. But anyway,
You think so? You
interesting.
think someone would be so upset about a story like this?
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well,
true.
perhaps if the owner was called Abner, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah. All right.
maybe
That's fair enough.
maybe maybe the owner of the house had a quarrel with Mr. James, and this was Mr. James' way of getting back.
Yes. Yes, yes, it reminds me of Ian Fleming having a quarrel with someone called Goldfinger, um, which
Which he
that
then later wrote
yeah,
a story with a villain as Goldfinger. Yes,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
I mean, that's my favorite James Bond movie.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the interesting aspects of this story in particular is, at least for me, uh, the fact that the the explanation of really what's going on and the like the motivations of the villain is explained basically in like a paragraph, and it still doesn't feel cheap, and it doesn't feel like too quick on the draw or anything like that. The passage itself is so horrifying and so blunt, like completely different from the rest of the story. And I mean, you know, uh, like you know what? I will even read it. Where is it? So Stephen Eliot, when he was of an age to understand them, um, found this. The most important sentences were as follows: "It was a belief very strongly and generally held by the ancients, of whose wisdom in these matters I have had such experience as induce me to place confidence in their assertions, that by enacting certain processes, which to us moderns," funny, he called himself modern, didn't he, "have something of a barbarian complexion, a very remarkable enlightenment of the spiritual faculties in man may be obtained. That, for example, by absorbing the personalities of
Excuse me.
certain number of his fellow creatures, an individual may gain a complete ascendancy over those orders of spiritual beings which control the elemental forces of our universe." I mean, what a setup, right? Like, so this is it's about to be explained what the guy was doing, right? And we get this short paragraph beforehand, which
Hmm.
basically gives this gravitas, right? And then
Hmm.
we move on to the actual resolution, and here it is. I mean, in its full glory. So if you haven't read Lost Hearts, stop right here, read everything, and then read the sentence for yourself first, because I don't want to spoil it. Honestly, it's a really well written.
Hmm.
It is recorded of Simon Magus that he was able to fly in the air, to become invisible, or to assume any form he pleased by the agency of the soul of a boy whom, to use the
Libelous.
libelous, thank you, libelous phrase employed by the author of the Clementine Recognitions, he had murdered. I found it set down, moreover, with considerable detail in the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, that similar happy results, may be produced by the absorption of the hearts of not less than 3 human beings below the age of 21 years. To the testing of the truth of this receipt, I have devoted the greater part of the last 20 years, selecting as the corpora villa of my experiment such persons as could conveniently be removed without accisioning. What
Occasion.
occasion? What great language is used that I don't even know it? A
Yeah.
sensible gap in society. The first step I effected by the removal of the Huebel Stanley.
One Phoebe Stanley. Yeah.
One Phoebe Stanley, a girl of gypsy extraction. What a weird word to use. On March 24, 1792. Now, hold on. Why does he say gypsy extraction? What does he mean by
Meaning
extraction?
she's a gypsy.
She
Yeah,
made
I
the-
understand the meaning that she is
Yeah.
of the race, but what does extraction mean in this? Do you know,
That's what
Rob?
it means. It means like you're of Russian extraction because you come from a Russian origin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ah, I
extracted.
see. So it's in this occasion used as a synonym for origin. I see.
Yes, yes, yes. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Right. But notice how like absolutely bonkers this paragraph is, right? Like it's so crazy, and everything else in the story is pretty normal, and then you get to this. The second, by the removal of a wandering Italian lad named Giovanni Paoli on the night of March 23, 1805. The final, quote-unquote, victim, to employ a word of repugnant in the highest degree to my feelings, must be my cousin, Stephen Elliott. His day must be this, March 24th, 1812. So, the fact that this man did not only look at this child and thought of this as a necessary evil that he sort of got okay with in his head. To me, the idea that he is like detested by the fact that he has to use the words like victim and murder, but that's exactly what's going on, right? So he's so far in his own mind, he's convinced himself so much that this is worth doing, and that the moral implications are no longer being considered. I think that's what's truly chilling, right? It's the human nature that's being exposed.
Yeah. Well, it's like nowadays. It's like when people use to liquidate instead of to kill. You know, like putting something in a liquidizer is kind of makes it sound all right, really.
Really?
Or neutralized, right? The enemies were neutralized at the border. Right?
Oh, yes, yes.
So, but I like that. Although for the most part, this story feels like a child is feeling all these emotions. In that moment, the author sets up a few things, right? So at the beginning, he writes, on the table in Mr. Abney's study, certain papers were found which explained the situation to Stephen Elliott when he was of an age to understand them. And as soon as he writes that, he goes into a very different style of writing. Very factual, expository, like 2 paragraphs. And both of them are so vivid and strong because I think, at least what I felt, maybe he didn't mean it when he wrote it, but my feeling was that we're now seeing from Stephen Elliott's perspective that he's much older, and he is realizing how weird the whole situation is and how awful all of these things that have transpired. And so he's looking at the situation in this cold shower reality. And that's why these two paragraphs are so vivid, so powerful in my mind. Because I feel like the entire story shifted in order for them to make sense.
And it's good the way that quotation from Mr. Abner's writings precedes the final paragraph of how they found Mr. Abner on that night, in what condition they found him. They could have, the author could have put it the other way around. He could have ended the story chronologically with the finding of these papers that Mr. Abner left. But it's much, much better the way he's done it, which is to quote from the papers and then in the final paragraph say Mr. Abner was found in his chair, his head thrown back, his face stamped with an expression of rage, fright, and mortal pain. In his left side was a terrible lacerated wound exposing the heart, blah, 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 blah. There was no blood on his hands, and a long knife that lay on the table was perfectly clean. That's another nice touch. In other words, what exposed his heart was not any knife, but the very long nails of this ghost of Giovanni Paoli. At least one assumes so, because the long nails are mentioned earlier on.
Yeah, the markings on the window of Stephen Elliott. I think basically that's another thing that I noticed is that the 2 ghosts didn't want to do any harm to anybody, even though that they were killed by this awful man until the last moment, because it seems that they're trying to warn Elliot to get the hell out. Right,
Mm.
like they keep appearing to him, and only because basically, right, it's literally like 10 minutes before the kid has to go in and get killed. They're like, all right, I guess we will kill, I guess we will destroy this evil man, right? So there's this inherent morality in the in the quote unquote saviors of the story, and it also makes sense why it would be frightening for a child to keep seeing ghosts. So it makes sense to be part of the story, right? It like flows in like this beautiful river. It just keeps
Yeah.
circling around. There's so much detail that you can really find and think about if you sit down with the story.
I
hadn't
don't
thought
I
of
don't
that.
get the feeling that the ghosts were making conscious decisions in any way though. What led you to think that they were
Because they keep appearing to the child. They keep ignoring their murderer. Like, all right, let's say somebody kills you and you get into like the spirit world. Let's say it exists, and like, all right, somehow you can go back to Earth. What would be the first thing you'd do? You'd probably go to the guy who killed you and see if you could do something to him, because how dare he kill you? But instead, right, the the way the story is structured, the ghosts only interact with Elliot, like directly. They only are shown to him directly, trying to sort of like warn him of the fate that's coming. Right, showing the clutched heart, trying to get to him into through the window to basically let him get out. But Elliot is oblivious to their communication. At least that's the way it felt to me, right? Like, so they keep trying to communicate with him, and it keeps failing. But they could have done what they do at the end of the story from the beginning, maybe, right? Why wouldn't they be able to? They could just go and kill him. So, which leads me to believe that they had a reason not to do it. And the only reason that makes sense to me, while reading the story and seeing all its parts, was the fact that they basically do it at the last moment, which means that they didn't want to do it. They didn't think of it as a solution. The
they
solution they wanted to
didn't
do.
want to do it, or they couldn't do it until the last moment.
I mean, they couldn't do it at the last moment is also a pliable explanation, but it's much more boring.
I think these are all very, very good questions, actually, and they didn't occur to me, I must admit. I think the reason why they didn't occur to me is because maybe I've got the most childish mind of the three of us.
Oh,
And
don't say that.
I simply accept the atmosphere of a story and whatever seems to arise from that atmosphere. And I think from the atmosphere of this story, and I'm thinking particularly of the couple of pages which starts with the line, "We have now arrived at March the 24th, 1812. It was a day of curious experiences for Stephen, a windy, noisy day which filled the house and the gardens with a restless impression. As Stephen stood by the fence of the grounds and looked out into the park, he felt as if an endless procession of unseen people was sweeping past him on the wind, borne on resistlessly and aimlessly, vainly striving to stop themselves, to catch at something that might arrest their flight and bring them once again into contact with the living world of which they had formed a part." I think that these spirits are subject to enormous forces which we can't guess at, sort of tidal forces, judging from that. And maybe whatever they did, they didn't really have any choice. I don't know. But a bit later it says, "Still as the night was, the mysterious population of the distant moonlit woods was not yet lulled to rest. From time to time, strange cries as of lost and despairing wanderers sounded from across the mere." Now, this is tremendous stuff, but it makes me think, anyway, if thinking is the right word, it makes me feel that there are whole categories of existence which we just can't guess at. and it's pretty useless to try and work out in terms of our own existence, using the logic of our own existence, what might have been the reason why, for example, as you fellas quite rightly point out, why didn't this move by the ghosts occur much earlier? Why was it left to the last minute?
Mm.
I don't know, but I think it's not a case of rational decision making.
I mean, they are children. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
That's another thing.
Yeah, that's true. All of them probably were, because probably this is my theory, and I only just recently thought of this, but perhaps there are other Mr. Abners throughout history who've been performing these atrocities, and maybe there's a whole
I mean,
host of these
there
victims.
definitely is, isn't there? Like
Yeah.
Magus and
Yeah.
Simon or something, right? Like
Yeah.
he did it.
That is actually a great point to bring up, because that was the part that was more
Interesting.
to me. Yes, because there's a suggestion of a coterie of magus and witches somewhere in the world who are performing all these human sacrifices in order to get supernatural power through the ages. And so when I was reading through the story, I was like a lot more intrigued by this background thing. I have to admit, it's like, okay, so how big is this network? How long has it been going on? Is there like a alpha necromancer of some sort?
If
That kind of
all
stuff.
right, if we were to write a sequel to the story, right, it would have to happen, right? Like, so Stephen Elliott is like, he's like 12 at the end of the story, right? So let's say it's 12 years later, he's 24, and the beginning is he's like in some beautiful church, and like monks are praying, and he comes in also like praying, and he goes into the prayer room, and he's talking to the father, and blah blah blah, and he's getting further and further into it, and then he's like, oh yeah, you've, like, in the beginning of the conversation, he says like, you've accepted so many children into your abode, it's so good to see, like you're doing so well, and blah blah blah. And then sort of he keeps hinting that he knows a bit more, and finally he says to the father exactly the same line, right? Like, you have taken so many children into your abode, haven't you, father? And then he shoots him with a revolver, and he comes out, and whatever, right? Like, and that, now we know he's like a
Something
witch
like
hunter,
that, right? Yeah.
Right. It'd have to. That's the way I'd
and
do it.
then we can turn it into an action movie.
Yeah, I mean, everything I write turns into an action movie, I think so.
You just made me think of something else, which is that supposing this Abner chap had murdered Stephen Elliott as well. Now, I don't suppose he would have got away with it from the authorities' point of view, because questions this Stephen Elliott was from the gentlemanly class. He was actually, I think, the guy's nephew, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Murdering stray waifs and gypsies is one thing, but murdering one's own nephew, or causing him, as the authorities would think, to disappear, would be highly suspicious. I think Abner was being a bit optimistic, thinking he would get away with it, unless he thought that he could use his superpowers to evade the authorities.
Well, I think you thought you could fly and like be invisible and be immortal, right? So I don't think you'd care anymore.
I think
that's.
Well,
I think that's.
But anyway, I mean, just to say, the Roll Off a Tangent podcast believes that killing anybody is wrong, right? So even if it's stray children off the street, so
Yeah.
but I guess in those times, police would care a lot less. You're right.
I think.
Even if he could fly, he couldn't take Aswelby Hall with him on his flights, could he? He'd have to abandon his.
I mean, I do get the sense that he was so looking forward to whatever powers he might gain at the end of the ritual, that his powers, his newfound supernatural powers, would get him out of whatever situation he he
Yeah.
lands himself in. Like the thing that I did get, the sense that I get about Mr. Abner is that he is a true believer in the ritual. And
Mm.
the thing is, when I was reading the story, I was also like thinking to myself, but so he's going through all this stuff, and then he's creating all these phantoms and specters that now haunt him. But what if he doesn't get the powers? Like what made him so sure, other than his own fervent desire that it was so, that he would get such powers?
Yeah. Yes, it's basically he believes in what's been written down in old documents, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He takes it all for granted. Yeah. Yeah.
But
He
all
just
right,
thinks, he's
I'm
going to win it somehow.
most sane people will just not kill like others. So maybe we can forgive the fact that the guy is crazy and like was thinking he would get away with killing his nephew. On the subject of sanity, though, I must come back to the idea that there's these people who like serve him and who are super okay with everything that's going on, right? Like, so while the guy who, like, to me, the real villains are the servants, not the guy, because the guy's crazy. All right, he thinks he's gonna get flight after drinking 3 hearts that he's made into ash into wine. Okay, like he needs to be in a in a psych ward. He shouldn't be on the streets. But there's people who are sane, who understand what's like at least can understand what's happening, can put 2 and 2 together, and they're just letting it all happen. That's the real like
Well,
awful
I
people.
think you're being too hard on them. I don't think that there was much of a chance that they would imagine anything about this. I think Mr. Abner is very plausible. And in fact, Stephen doesn't distrust him at all.
He's a child.
Yes, I know, but children have an instinct about these things, and you can often get a situation where a child sees through somebody which an adult doesn't. But in this case, nobody guessed what Abner was up to, and the servants, they're just servants. They're not privy to Abner's thoughts at all. And also, Abner had to be plausible. It was part of the whole operation that he was if you like a confidence trickster in a way. He has to be plausible. I don't think he was crazy in the certifiable sense of being crazy, because nowadays people might think you're crazy if you believe in the supernatural at all, but the story assumes the supernatural does exist. Otherwise, none of it would have happened.
I mean, it is a given fact that in the context of the world of Lost Hearts, that the supernatural does exist.
The world of it's the franchise. The world of Frost Hearts of Lost Hearts. No, I like the way you said it. It's good.
But totally right. You could Stephen saw the specters of the 2 children that were sacrificed before him, and there were plenty of clues as to inexplicable actions, the scratches on the door, the rats in the cellar that talk, that kind of stuff.
Why did this is an investigation now. This is no longer a review of this book. It's a deep dive into the story of Lost Hearts. So what's her name? Mrs. Bunch. All right. She's told, "Yo, there's marks. I got scratches." She's like, "Close the window, close your doors at night. Don't tell Mr. Abney about it." Why does she say don't? If she's not complicit, why does she say don't tell him? What is her desire? That, I think for me that was the biggest clue when I was like, you rotten woman. Like, how you're awful. You know this is happening, don't you? That's when my kind of mind clicked when I read that.
Fair enough. I missed that in my reading.
That's a point. You've got a point there. Yeah, I still don't actually agree with you, but I mean, if you were a lawyer trying to make a case for the prosecution against Mrs. Bunch, that would be a sensible point to bring up. I still think,
Your Honor, she was complicit. Sorry.
No, I still think. Now listen, Your Honor. I think Mrs. Bunch was innocent, but consciously she didn't believe anything bad of Mr. Abner, but maybe she was a bit scared of him deep down, or maybe she's just comes from a sort of class of people in those days. Maybe you know how in detective stories in the old days you got these proud working class people who didn't want the police in their house. They felt that if the police came into their house, it was a great shame. You know, that they would suffer a social stigma. I don't really understand this feeling myself, but
I have the police
it's a
over
definite,
all the time. Sorry.
it's a definite theme. You know, oh, we've never had the police in our house. You know, well, I think that there's Mrs. Bunch has got a thing about not bothering Mr. Abner with anything peculiar. It sort of reflects on her, maybe, or she thinks that she would lose credibility or something. And also there may be a tiny bit of cowardice involved. Maybe she thinks there's something funny going on, but she thinks in the sort of illogical human way that if you talk about it, it's more likely to get worse, and the best thing to do is to be quiet and hope it goes away.
To tag on to Rob's point, actually, the sense that I get of about Mrs. Bunch is that she's just there to do a certain type of work, and she doesn't want to get involved in anything else, or see no evil, hear no evil, right? And the line that made me think that is when Stephen woke up one day with the laceration on his gown, sleeping gown, and her words and her reaction was less, where did you get this gashes, and more of a, you just created so much more work for me, you stupid boy. I don't know what you did, but you just made so much more work for me. And that's
I think that just proves that she's lazy. Nothing else.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
So my sense of Mrs. Bunch is that she's there to do certain set of work, and she doesn't want any extra stuff, like anything else other than that.
Right, but that doesn't absolve her from being somewhat complicit in it. Even if you sort of like look away from horrible things happening, I think that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the issue, isn't it? I mean, I'll tell you the other 2 points which made me suspicious of Miss Bunch. First one was when she was telling about the girl, when like, oh yeah, he's such a great man. He took her in for like 2 weeks and then she suddenly disappeared. No one knows where she went. And then there was like a second boy that exactly the same thing happened to him. And if she's not seeing a pattern, she doesn't want to see it, which again makes her, in my eyes at least, not a good person, right? Or she's just dim, which, all right, okay, if your argument that is she's like dim and she just doesn't realize it, that's fair enough, right? But
no, it's more,
I guess
like
I'm not
my argument is, for her, it's more of a not my problem kind of thing. You know?
Right, but that's terrible. That's awful. That's the reason I hate her. Because like, how dare, like, it's a child. You have to do something. I can't see that happening in front of me and not do it, even if I'm like a minimum paid maid or whatever. Something I've done for a long time, as you know. The other thing is that the author specifically chooses to reveal the thing going on in the cellar through adults. And then the adults kind of shushing Elliot's questions, and sort of like not divulging in them. Just as much of a stronger scene could be him going into the wine cellar himself and hearing these things, and then telling the adults, and the adults being like, you're silly. But no, the adults know that something's going on, right? They're talking about it in front of him, and as soon as they figure out that he's being frightened, or that like it becomes an inconvenience for them, they just shush him off and don't like try and not make it into a situation, make him not ask questions. Again, let's say that even you're right, that they know nothing about it. The fact that they are ignoring all the signs completely makes them at least not good people in my eyes. And I think that, to me, I was looking at it and I was thinking, Oh god, this poor boy, like in this mansion who basically has no one to turn to, no one who's a good person that's gonna try in any way, shape or form help him. How is he gonna get out of this, right? Like he's probably gonna get done by this Mr. Abney. There's no one here to help him. That's terrifying. If I was of course, if I was a child in the same situation, I probably wouldn't be thinking that way. But as an adult looking at this child situation, I'm horrified by the idea that this could happen to someone, right? And I think that's where the horror came for me.
Yeah. I'd forgotten a bit about the dressing gown or whatever it is being clawed. I must admit, I don't really understand that. Maybe it's an attempt to warn. I suppose it's an attempt to warn.
To frighten him, to make him go away, right? Like that's what I thought that they were doing. Again, look, we can't talk to the author. He's unfortunately dead, but we can only speculate, right? And my speculation has created a very different story to the one you guys read, which I think proves that the short story is great. Like if it can create these two different perspectives.
Just in 15 pages. Yeah, it's very short. Yeah.
Like look at the last week's story. It's great. It's fantastic. It's action. Adrenaline pumping. What's going to happen in the next 5 sentences? We don't know what is going to happen. This doesn't have this quality. Instead, it has this simmering darkness, right? And that's the difference in genre. It creates a much different feeling.
Yeah. And if you like this, the good news is that the collected M.R. James runs to well over 600 pages. Most of them really, really good.
Is there a sequel to Lost Heart?
Not a sequel to that particular one. There are some that are just as scary as Lost Heart. Have you seen the film Night of the Demons, starring Donna Andrews and I forget now who the other people are. It's a Jacques Tourneur film.
When was it made?
1957.
Does not ring a bell.
It sounds familiar, but I don't remember.
Anyway, it's from a short story by M.R. James called "Casting the Runes." So another good one.
Casting the Runes. Maybe in the future, viewers will visit that one. Who knows?
The idea of casting the runes is that you hand this drawing to somebody you don't like, and it means that a demon is going to come for him in so many days, and the only way he can get out of it is by handing you the drawing back.
That's a chain letter.
Well,
so like
yes, now,
something like this.
If you were to hand that over to XJ, for example.
Oh, come on. Why XJ? Why did you have to choose
hand
him?
It back to
well,
Nikki.
if you quarreled with him for some reason, he would have to hand it back. And of course, you would try and avoid that. So he'd have to do it by stealth, You'd have to say, oh, by the way, here's a lottery ticket for you.
I guess.
No. It would be like this because XJ has been sneezing the entire time. Oh, XJ, wipe your nose with this, and he's like,
thanks, but I prefer to do it on my sleeve.
Well, no, come on. You don't know that this is a dangerous piece of
foresight.
Piece of tissue.
Like I said, foresight makes you a cold bastard.
You just don't trust. You're like, he's handing me a painting. There must be something wrong here. I'm not taking it. All right. Fantastic.
So that sounds like. So it sounds like M.R. James is he's a progenitor of the chain letter urban legend.
Like The Ring, you mean? The movie.
Well, I mean that's like this urban legend, right? Which is exactly as Rob just described. It's called a chain letter. You get something, you want to cast out some bad luck, you just give it to somebody, and then the person will have to pass the ladder on.
Right.
I remember being a kid and seeing a lot of images like that online. Like there's like a picture of like a creepy ghost, and it would be like, you've seen the ghost. If you don't share this with 3 friends in the next 7 days, you will die.
Something like that, yeah.
Ah. Ah.
I guess
I'm still alive,
I
and I never
guess
shared.
I guess we found the progenitor of the chain ladder.
I mean,
Maybe, maybe
it is also likely that he heard this idea from a different urban legend and created it into a story, but we'll never know.
that's most likely true. Yeah,
Hmm.
interesting.
I'm not I'm not going on Wikipedia to figure it out, so we'll never know.
No.
Yes, let's keep it that way. Not our
The
problem.
mystery continues.
Not our
Uh,
problem.
no, oh no! God, I live in a cruel world. I have just realized. Um, yeah, but the story of Stephen Elliott is really fascinating. Overall, I think this, although as XJ rightly pointed out, that you can sort of see it coming, what's going to happen. Um, the whole thing that the children are going to take revenge on the guy, that there's something really creepy going on, and so forth. Right? It's pretty easy to grasp. But still, the way it's written is flawless. The many themes explored within 15 pages is fantastic and astonishing for for such a short story.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it is very well written with a very flowery sentences characteristic of that time.
I don't agree. It's not flowery sentences. It's just English. It's just
Yes, Rob. Yes,
it's
Rob.
not written in jerky. What I call jerky, which is what modern writers write in. Sort of. Uh, I
We
mean,
we all know that you are the master of the words when it comes to old language, but
Yeah.
you don't need to rub it in our face every 5 minutes, okay?
Yeah.
I enjoy doing that though.
Yeah, I know. My nose is almost off from it. It's been happening a long. But you're right. I mean, for you, as someone who has consumed this type of literature from almost all of your life, Rob, this is just a standard writing of prose. But I think for a lot of, I think what actually was trying to say, for a lot of readers who haven't looked at these older stories, this will feel like a much more succinct, flowery language. Right.
Maybe I'll amend that to for people who were brought up on American writing.
Right.
American writing is a lot more to the point. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe. Although there is full of surprises, American literature. I mean, Henry James is the most waffly writer you could imagine, and he was American. But yeah, maybe there's something in what you say.
Perhaps. Yeah.
I don't think you can count H.P. Lovecraft as a normal writer anyway, so a normal American writer either. So his would you say his language is flowery?
No,
Rob.
actually.
It's not flowery. Is not quite the word. It's verbose, maybe. In some respects, although not in his best stories. His best stories, it's perfectly all right.
Perfectly all right.
And if you want
What a British thing to say. Perfectly
if
all
you
right.
want
Sorry.
a bad Lovecraft story, I think The Lurking Fear. If
Lurking
you
Fear.
want to do a jokey roll off a tangent session,
Let's do one of those. A bad
on The
Lovecraft
Lurking
story. A
Fear,
bad E. Howard story. Yeah, we definitely should keep that in mind.
Bad Robert E. Howard story doesn't exist, so it's impossible to do.
Sure. Whatever you say, Nikki.
Well, I'm a fanboy. What can I say? I will defend that man.
Some of Howard's stuff is a bit less good than others, but I agree. There's no such thing as a bad. Story.
I was about to say blasphemy, but you saved yourself.
But there's such a thing as a bad Lovecraft story, certainly.
Oh, absolutely. That I agree with. Right. So, do we have anything else we're coming up on? We're past the 1 hour mark, actually. So, anything else we want to add on M.R. James?
No. Great author. Can't wait to see more of his works. Honestly, read more of them. Really made an impression on me with the story.
Well, and with that,
The one that
Oh.
scared me most is Count Magnus. I don't know about you, but I don't often really get scared by stories, but Count Magnus did scare me. I don't think I'm going to read it again, actually.
tantalizing. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that.
No, he has to. No, we're not gonna do a story that Rob doesn't read.
Okay, and with that, before I actually wrap this up though, I hope the short story competition, the challenge thing is going well for you, Nikki.
Yeah, I started 3 times.
Awesome. That's
Two times I said no, this sucks, and I deleted it. So we'll see how my 3rd time goes.
that sounds perfectly normal for any writer. All right. Okay, you guys have a great week ahead, and to everyone else listening out there as well, thank you for your attention. Join us again. Do the usual subscribe stuff, and support the channel, such as it may be. All right.
Right.
All of you take
See you,
care.
folks.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Right.